To install your kit, you're going to need the spring, the O-ring, one of your trigger catch springs, the trigger catch, the plunger, and the trigger. First things first, remove all of the screws from your blaster and put them someplace where you won't lose them. A Phillips head screwdriver is perfect for taking the screws out. You need a small one that'll fit down through the screw holes. And a tip is to magnetize your screwdriver so it will pick up the screws out of your blaster. It speeds up the process. The flathead screwdriver will be used to help you split the shell. You don't want to force the shell open because that can cause the accessory tooth and trigger springs to fly out and get lost. So once you've removed all the screws, remove the back cap and half of the priming handle, actually the whole priming handle, and set that aside. Now the Rampage has a tendency to stick up here in the trigger guard and up in the front of the barrel. So as you're splitting your shell, just take note of that and try not to force it open. You want it to come apart gently. Okay, so I can feel it stuck right here. I'm going to pop it open. There we go, and it's stuck up here. Okay. You'll notice that the trigger was already in here, but not the correct trigger spring. So we will be swapping that out during this process. Alright, first things first, take note of your accessory teeth. They may stay in place like these did just now. If they pop out, set them with your screws and be sure not to lose them. Get a good look at how your blaster goes together. With this install, you shouldn't have to take out all of the internals. We are not going to be removing the air restrictor. The air restrictor does more good than harm with most of the elite blasters, and leaving it in doesn't affect performance negatively. Okay, so some things to look out for. This trigger connector bar here, which also enables slam fire, the hook has to be in front of the bolt sled. When you put your blaster back together, you want to make sure that this hooks onto the bolt sled and isn't stuck behind it. Okay, so now remove your stock spring and set that aside. And remove your stock plunger. The plunger is a little hard to remove, so hold your internals in with one hand and work it out with the other. Oh, actually it would help if the trigger catch was out of the way. Again, hold your internals and remove the trigger catch. And set the stock catch aside, spring and all. Now your plunger should come out. There we go. There's no O-ring on this one because we were using it for testing. And another note, your plunger tube should be able to move freely. So before you close your blaster up, or if you do any other mods, make sure that this can move freely, or you won't be able to use your blaster. Okay, from here, take your unleashed solid plunger rod and install the O-ring. It will just slide on. You'll notice it's a little loose and it's a little wider than the stock O-ring to compensate for the taper in the plunger. When you install it, let's see, lightly grease it after you puncture the tip of your grease tube to open it. Just a dab of grease. You don't want to use too much because it will just get everywhere and it causes the inside of your blaster to collect dirt and stuff. So just a thin coat of grease is good. You don't need to grease anything else in this blaster. The bolt sled is fine. You don't need to put anything on the rails. It's all good. So from here, work the plunger head in an angle, making sure the O-ring does not pinch. There. So once it's in, it should move very easily, and you can just see the O-ring through the plunger tube itself. So lift and press it and spin your plunger tube around. If there's any pinch, you'll be able to see it if the O-ring has been pinched between the plunger tube and the plunger rod. And then you'll have to take your plunger rod out and reseat the O-ring. But this one looks good. So just press it into place. And next we will install the trigger catch. Take your trigger catch spring and pop it down over the hooks on the post. So next time you open your blaster, you won't have to worry about this spring shooting off. Alright, and with the trigger catch, you'll notice this white housing that holds the plunger tube assembly in place protrudes back to where protrudes back into the trigger catch's groove here and here at the bottom. So you want to match that up, the housing at the top, you want to match it up with this groove in the trigger catch, right up to the left of the post if the catch is facing you. You will be able to assemble your blaster if it is out of this groove. However, priming will feel much more difficult and pulling the trigger will be very hard. So to do that, lift up on the plunger tube to lift the assembly and slide the trigger catch underneath. Okay. If lined up correctly, this housing can be pressed all the way down and the trigger catch will still be able to move freely. If it's not lined up correctly and you push down on this housing, you'll feel some resistance there. Alright, now take the top of your trigger catch spring and pop it under the shell, like that. We're good to go. Now notice the trigger connector bar. It's still in front of the bolt sled, and this free-floating piece right here is up under the trigger catch. So next, take your trigger, and this had the stock spring on there for testing purposes, and we're going to set this aside, and take the stronger trigger spring, and again, as with the trigger catch, slide it over the hooks, like so, and this will sit spring first into the blaster, just like that. This flat area below the trigger interfaces underneath a rail in the shell, and it sits just like that. It should move smoothly. There shouldn't really be any sharp edges on the trigger itself, but make sure you inspect it. So in the event that there's like a burr or something, it's not going to damage your shell. Alright, so that sits in like so, nice and smooth. We are going to leave the mainspring out until we get the shell together, because I find it's a lot easier to seat the spring correctly if you install it in that order. So before you put your shell back together, give everything a once over to make sure everything is in place and flush. Double check the bolt sled to make sure it can move without any resistance. See, the plunger tube is able to move back and forth without resistance. This hook is still in front of the bolt sled. Everything looks good. So, take the top of the shell and drop it down on top. And the same places where it's stuck, taking it apart, will stick when we put it back together. Be extra careful not to lose the accessory teeth here, so I like to put my hands over them in case they fly off. So again, don't force it shut, just gently apply pressure around the seam until it goes together. Some of the other blasters won't go together, and then you sort of have to actuate the magazine release and pop them together. Not so with the Rampage. It should go together nice and easy, just like that. So from here, pop the plunger back in. You can do a test prime. So we'll guide the plunger to make sure it doesn't get stuck. There. Make sure it locks. It shouldn't give you any unnecessary resistance. Bring it forward, holding the priming rod forward. We can pull the trigger. Yep, nice and smooth. Okay, from here, install your priming handle. and your mainspring. So when you do the mainspring, put in a few of the screws here at the back, just as placeholders to keep your shell together. So I'll do this one right underneath the magazine well, and this one right at the top, and one in the center of the grip. So this will keep everything locked in place. Take your spring and tilt it into the hole in the back of the blaster, like that. From here, you can sort of screw it into place. And then press the last few coils in, ensuring that there is no metal protruding out of the blaster. And to make sure it's in correctly, you can sort of do a slight half prime, just to make sure the plunger tube can move in and out of the blaster freely, unobstructed. Okay, from here, install the rest of your screws, put on the back plate, and give it some test fires. Because it has the air restrictor in, a few dry fires here and there are okay. So I'm going to give it a quick test before putting in the rest of the screws. So holding the priming handle forward and the back cap on, pull the trigger. Okay, now that you've verified that it test fired and everything went well, you go ahead and put in the rest of your screws and enjoy your new kit. Thanks for watching.